Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you're with us wherever you are. It's been so great to see some of the traffic on the podcast here, where we're excited to bring you some great people. And we exist. We're here to uplift, to encourage, to dwell on the good, to inspire, to educate, to encourage. We're not in denial. Suffering is prevalent on planet Earth, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Bad things happen, tough times come, and so having your eyes wide open in that context is important, and to realize that that's what we deal with on Earth. And so you can do both, and that's what I've found in the scripture that I always refer back to is what we dwell on, whatever's praiseworthy, noble. That's where my inspiration comes for this. And so we're just glad you're here for the ride, and we're so grateful. This is our if you could believe it, it's gone quickly. This is our 300th episode today, and it's couldn't be a better guest for that occasion. So we've been excited. Most of them have been TV shows, probably 90%, but we also do some special podcasts, and we started in the summer of 19, not knowing that COVID was coming, and it was a perfect time to kick off. To a lot of people had a lot of time at home, and so we were able to bring some light and hopefully encouragement. And then we just kept going. And man, I've loved this. I've loved so many of you that are out there that have been guests and telling the stories. It's been really fun, and we're not here for celebrities. The celebrities are great, but I really love lifting up the people that you've never heard of, and telling their stories. And there's so much genius in every single human. So grateful to be here. Grateful you're here on our 300th episode. And I'm so excited today to be joined by my friend, Dr. Gayle Beebe. Dr. Beebe is the president of Westmont College. I think it's been 18 years now, if I have that right.
Just started my 18th year.
Started your 18th year. Yeah. Gayle's married to Pam. I have 3 wonderful children, and they're all married now.
2 are married, and then one gets married June 27th.
Oh, is that right?
The third one does.
Okay,
yeah,
well, we're taping this in late May, so that's coming. Wow, I didn't realize that was
right around the corner.
So Gayle and I are in similar stretches of life. We'll see who's the grandfather first. That'll be our competition. I'm rooting for that.
That's great.
Dr. Beebe has several advanced degrees. He studied with Peter Drucker in leadership. He played catcher, 3-sport athlete, and a good friend. So it's so great. We had him on the TV show, but this will be fun to get into his new book, which is sitting in front of me here, The Crucibles That Shape Us, Navigating the Defining Challenges of Leadership, InterVarsity Press. The Crucibles That Shape Us, Navigating the Defining Challenges of Leadership, and the foreword by the great David Brooks. But I got to read this weekend, I was telling you, and it was really fun. And I know I've been watching, obviously, you for these 18 years, and you have faced some significant challenges at Westmont, floods and fires and pandemic and racial tension and then all the stuff we don't know about. So, I know it's with a college president, it's both. But when did you start thinking about, I think I want to write some of this down?
Well, Dean, first, it's just wonderful to be back. Thank you for having me. Love being on your show and just enjoy you. So very privileged to be with you. The book took 4 years, and I really started thinking about it in 2019. But it was more in relationship to the natural disasters that had afflicted the college, and then thinking about just other parts, the problem of evil and suffering, the challenges that we face that really more than anything require endurance, and so I was thinking along those lines, and then the pandemic hit, and with the pandemic came just, basically trying to figure out how to make it through the pandemic, not knowing how long it would be, not knowing what we would face, not even knowing who would still be with us at the end of it. Mm-hmm. And so as we opened back up, I was talking with a friend of the college, and he said, there's a lot of bad things that have happened during the time that you've been president. Have you ever thought about writing about them? And I said, I actually have, and we made some jokes about it. And and whatnot. And so I sat down and started experimenting with the ideas. And when I would have a speaking engagement, would test run different ideas. And then I was invited to speak at a national conference and basically did an overview of what is now the 7 chapters that make up the book. And it just landed well. It was well received. And so that gave me the signal to really go to work.
Yeah.
And then finished the book, finished the first draft in April of 23, spent the summer really revising it, and then by September 1, the book was pretty well in order, and then just got released on May 7th.
Yeah, well, pick it up if you can. I think it's everywhere, Amazon and so forth. But again, the title of the book is The Crucibles That Shape Us, Dr. Gayle Beebe. And I want to get into it. So Dr. Beebe touches on 7 crucibles here. I'm not gonna you got to buy the book. Okay, so let me just tell the audience, you got to buy the book. I'm not going to give everything away, but we're going to touch on some of this. But I wanted to start with what you just said, because the introduction here is called Lessons in Endurance. Yeah. And, I know Greg Spencer well. He was a professor of mine. I think he wrote about the quieter virtues.
Absolutely. Yeah, wonderful thought leader and wonderful guy.
Wonderful friend. And he, but when I was reading from you, how do I say this? Endurance, especially for type A achiever types, endurance is not like a glamorous thing. I have
That's a great point.
It's not like something you post on Instagram. Oh, I endured today.
Yeah.
It'd be hard to. And I have a 92-year-old friend, a very close friend. He's been married for 68 years or something. And he said, Dean, I am very well aware of why people get divorced. I'm not sure how people stay married.
Yeah.
How they make it.
Yeah.
And we don't celebrate that enough, I don't think. But just enduring is a thing.
Yeah.
What if we had a parade for the couple that made it? You made it. You know what I mean? I don't have any judgment. The endurance, you've made it 18 years as college. Yeah. Like, if you hadn't raised any money and you've accomplished more than we couldn't even do the program on that. You've accomplished so much. But what if we just celebrated the fact that somebody endured? That's an amazing thought. So when I read just the title, Lessons in Endurance, and got into that a little bit, but share some thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I just think you're right. I think so many good things happen because we persist, and so often there's the temptation to give up. Oh, maybe this was a bad idea. Maybe we shouldn't keep doing it. But if you have a sense of purpose in what you're doing, and you know that it's going to be serving purposes that will outlive you, there's enormous meaning in just sticking to things. And so some of the great personalities that are covered in the book that have inspired me were also great models of endurance. Things didn't come instantly, but they faced huge challenges. And in those huge challenges, they found the energy and the strategy to actually do well and persevere. And as a result, completely unforeseen outcomes resulted that never would have come about. And it was a result, not that they saw how everything would get settled, but they knew they had to persevere in order to get to a new outcome. And it's in that you just find these huge profiles in courage of people who actually didn't know what the outcome would be, but knew that more than anything else, they just had to persevere in order to get to a better place. And that's inspiring to me.
Totally.
People have asked me, how did you know these different strategies that we deployed at Westmont during the pandemic, opening, being able to be on campus, creating these academic tents, 14 different academic tents where we did classes outside so that they'd be COVID safe. And people ask me, how did I know it would work out? And I said, I actually didn't.
Yeah, right.
And this is what I think is part of the discipline of perseverance is you have to stay close. And so we literally met every day. We reviewed where are we in terms of isolation? Where are we in terms of quarantine? Is there a super spreader? How do we keep all the supplies coming? And so every day was a lesson in perseverance, not knowing when it would end, just knowing that we had to persevere. And you learn so much, and honestly, it gives you inspiration for other challenges that you face as you recognize that we largely got through it because we just insisted that we would, and then we had to figure it out every day.
That's so good. It's so good. Yeah, and there has to be a vision that carries you.
Yeah, there does. And I love what I do, and I love the purposes of Westmont College. I literally wake up every day and during my own personal devotions, thank the Lord that I get to serve his purposes through the work of Westmont. And so getting to open so that the students could be educated, that they could be in community, that we could do everything that we do best, but recognizing we had to do it under restraint. Even though that was a huge challenge, and people have often said, man, that was just a ton of work. Why did you do it? Well, you do it because you see the purposes of God at work, and that's incredibly motivating and incredibly rewarding. And so as you look, and then you get past these times and you look back on them and you're thankful for them because it did require a huge amount of sacrifice, but you also just feel incredible gratitude that you got to do it, had the privilege of getting to do it, and so that's very meaningful.
That's amazing. Things get bumpy. We had a wedding. I told you, our oldest daughter got married, and I was actually I gave my little quick speech at the beginning of the reception, like the father of the bride does, and I was counting up the years of marriage.
Oh my goodness!
Between Dave and Carla Talbot and John and Patty Wilson and Jody and Nonna Ray and Micah's other set of grandparents, and it's like huge number, big number. And then I threw me and Susan in there and Micah's parents, and I realized what we have here is a rich heritage legacy. No judgment on divorce. It happens, and I'm not. I don't judge anybody. Right. And by the grace of God, I'm married.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest with you, so I haven't been like the world's greatest. But when I counted up the years, I'm like, this is really valuable.
Yeah.
Enduring, staying the course.
Absolutely.
And if you get to the end of your life, and the answer is, well, what'd you do with your life? I stayed married.
Yeah.
There's so much there that is a gift.
Absolutely.
To your entire family and a witness and a testimony.
Intergenerational.
But isn't that true?
Yeah. Oh, I love it. And I mean, I admire it, and I just think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Well, I love what you've written about here. And if you don't know Westmont College, we're in Santa Barbara, California, a couple hours north of Los Angeles. And Dr. Beebe is the president at Westmont College. And he's been through floods and fires and pandemic and racial tensions. And then he also writes about losing both of his parents, including his beloved father at age 60 in a surprise heart attack and other things and so one of the things I had noted when I was reading this weekend was that and I'm going to get into some of the crucibles, but how do we stay people of great hope, knowing that suffering is such a real part of life?
Well, Dean, that's a huge and beautiful question. And I really think that, like so much of life, you gain inspiration from life from seeing and hearing the stories of others who've gone before you. And so, as I mentioned, Chapter 6 is on the crucible of human suffering. And you mentioned the loss of both my parents. They were different types of losses, and even in that, there were models of people who had gone before me that helped me understand, put it in perspective, not lose confidence in God or in the goodness of God, but just really recognize that my faith, or the common faith that my parents had given me, had really given me the opportunity to be in proximity and community with people who had suffered, who had worked through it, and who had a deeper, wiser understanding of the meaning and purpose of life as a result of suffering. My wife's a grief recovery counselor, and so I've learned a ton from her about this. early in our marriage is when my dad died, and so she was in her counseling program, getting her master's in counseling. Actually helped direct her into grief recovery because she recognized that there's very few resources. It's a huge challenge, and people do recover. You heal from it, but you really need help, and you need community. And so she runs a grief recovery ministry here in the local community, and it's just amazing to me the hardship that people go through, the heartbreak, and the recovery, and to see them come through just some of the worst things that you could ever imagine, get to the other side and be able to turn around and then invest their life in people who are just entering the tunnel of suffering. It's just amazing. And you recognize the goodness of God, and it just gives you a great deal of confidence in the life of faith. And we live with a spirit of gratitude because of it.
That's so neat. Character, when you're talking about, the crucibles that shape us, and of course the scripture talks about suffering and we talked about enduring, perseverance builds character. And I think about character a lot, and I've learned the hard way in my life, but that character is more important than gifting. And we're seeing leaders fall one after the other, whether it's pastors and of course we hear about all the famous ones, but it's difficult, and we continue to lift up gifting so oftentimes.
That's a great point.
And maybe before people have the character to sustain it. What you're talking about is really being shaped as a person as you're suffering, which really builds that character. But can you comment on that at all?
Well, it's a great question, great observation. Pam and I were listening recently to a podcast by Tim Keller, one of his sermons, and it's kind of interesting that this new technology allows us to have these people, long after they're in heaven, we're still listening. And this was an interesting sermon, and he was working through all of these personalities in Scripture that we read and we think of as legendary, but he's going through all of their flaws. Of course, most notoriously, King David,
right?
Both a murderer and an adulterer.
Right.
And so Keller's point in part is don't be too judgmental, but also recognize that, we go, why would God use people like this? And Keller goes, because it's the best available. and you literally, when he said it, I thought, I have never thought of it that way, of God uses all of us, and all of us are broken, and we're broken in different ways. But Dean, you have a beautiful testimony. I've heard your testimony given publicly, and it's powerful. And it's such a journey of redemption, of you actually making your peace with choices that you had made that had brought difficulty to you. But you didn't let that be the last chapter. And I was just so inspired hearing your own life story and your own journey of faith, which I think is for all of us. We all have things in our own journey that we have to overcome in order to be suitable to be used by God in a way that will further his purposes, which, you bring so much hope and light to people because of your own ministries and your own work. And it's just a wonderful story of redemption. All of us have that journey, and all of us are asked to go through it in different ways. But it's just an amazing way in which God ends up using us.
How does he do it?
How does
he do it?
He wishes he had better talent, but he's stuck with us.
Right. They have a thing. They have a slogan in Alcoholics Anonymous. They said, the good news is there is an answer. The bad news is it's us.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12-step movement has discovered so many pathways. It has discovered the pathway for so many healings. And I've never been through 12-step or those programs, but I have been exposed to the thought process and the discipline, and then so many of my friends have been through some form of them, that it's really been a wonderful one of the ways in which God actually crafts a journey.
Your good friend Dallas Willard said it was maybe the closest thing to the church.
Well, and it's really interesting. One of Dallas's key interpreters, John Ortberg, talks often about the 12-step movement. And I was just at a conference with John, and he was bringing up step 4, and it just is remarkable to me how that's become a part of our common language, that we're very comfortable with the language of the 12-step movement. And very comfortable understanding the way in which people heal from all kinds of addictions.
It's it's an amazing thing, and it's not, I don't lift it up in an inappropriate way, but it is a tool. I think that's been
That's the best way. I think
Yeah.
that's the right way to see it. It is a tool that has been created, and it's just very effective.
Yeah, man, I've never laughed so hard as when I was in a couple of those meetings. I'm telling you, the characters and oh my gosh, I loved it. So again, we're here to talk about the book, but the book is The Crucibles That Shape Us: Navigating the Defining Challenges of Leadership. It's InterVarsity Press, and what Dr. Beebe does here is goes through 7 crucibles: the crucible of mismeaning, of enduring challenge, of human treachery, of awakened moral conscience, the crucible of social conflict, crucible of human suffering, and the crucible of personal choice. And each are so interesting, and as you can see here, I've kind of rabbit-eared about half the book. But there was something in the enduring challenge part that I wanted to talk about. We've talked about this a little bit in terms of suffering, and being understanding failure.
Yeah.
I love the Winston Churchill quote that he started with.
Yeah.
My success consists of going from one failure to the next without loss of enthusiasm. I thought that's one of the. I never read that before. I thought that is absolutely so true. And I tell my boys, you're a baseball player.
Yeah.
I tell my boys, if you're trying to make contact, then you're going to hit a weak ground ball to shortstop all season. You have to swing.
Yeah.
You have to swing and hit the ball with that speed. And guess what happens when you try to do that? You strike out. But you know what I'm saying? For one of my seasons in high school, I was working. I was petrified of striking out. I was number 2 hitter, and I contacted, put the bunt down, and all. We bunted back in those days.
Yeah, needed to get on base.
Yeah, and get on base, move guys around.
Yeah.
But then when I realized when I was doing this swinging to make contact to avoid striking out, I was grounding out to shortstop all season.
That is so interesting.
You gotta swing, and when you do that in life, you fail.
Oh, that's so true.
And talk about this for a second.
Well, I love sports as you do, and learn so much from it. And one of the things that I think that athletes do learn how to come back from defeat, how to come back from failure, because there's these great ads about Michael Jordan and other superstar athletes, and the ad is about all the times they failed, and all you think of is all the times they succeeded.
Right.
And so, I remember that there would be analogies that if you're a 300 hitter, you are a great hitter. Yeah. That means you failed 7 of the 10 times, right. And you're considered great. And so it's really developing a perspective on that. The enduring challenge, part of the reason I love Winston Churchill is, he had legendary victories and legendary defeats. And you look at that and you just say, okay, it's amazing what a person can overcome if they're actually determined. And my father used to say, never let defeat define you. And I just think so often about whatever goes wrong, don't let that be the last chapter. Always work to come back from it. And the Crucible of Enduring Challenge is really about people who faced huge setbacks and had to come back.
And you've created a whole office of institutional resiliency, right?
Oh, absolutely.
After all these
disasters. That's absolutely right.
Which is amazing. Who thinks about that? That's a great idea. I wouldn't have thought of that. Institutional resiliency. It's almost like we need our own little department of personal resiliency in life.
And Dean, if I could say it this way, this is part of paying attention and showing up every day for work and staying engaged. What we realized, going clear back to the 2008 Tea Fire, is it had never dawned on me that part of fighting a wildfire is being sure the first priority of the firefighters was to be sure everybody was alive. So they went door to door to be sure everyone was alive, not to fight the fire. So no water got put on the fire on our campus for 3 hours. Well, as a result of that, we developed our own volunteer fire department within the buildings and grounds staff at Westmont, because we realized we're on our own. And in a wildfire, we'll eventually get resources, and the strike team showed up from LA combined with the Santa Barbara firefighters, and they got everything under control. But it didn't start out that way, and we realized we had to be
Wow.
able to be first responders. We wouldn't have thought of that if we wouldn't have been there looking, paying attention, and just going, what do we need to do different as we go forward? But I think that's true of all of life. You just have to pay attention to what worked, what didn't, and how could we have done better.
And you had to make some split-second decisions. I mean, they're driving the morning of the flood, and you're driving, and then you turn around the car, and you're with your daughter, and you're having to make some real quick decisions.
Well, it's interesting that this is. Here's what had happened. So I had awakened, and I do get up early, and I was making coffee in the kitchen when the torrential downpour. We have a skylight in the kitchen, and it literally sounded like it was going to shatter. The rain was hitting it so hard. And then momentarily, just a few moments later.
9 minutes, right?
Yeah, it was a 9-minute. It was just thunderous. I mean, it's like, and I grew up in Oregon where there's a lot of rain, and I've been in a lot of rainstorms. This was so noisy. I mean, it's just hard to believe. But, just a few minutes after that, you suddenly saw this huge red kind of amber cloud, and it's like, oh my goodness, is that a fire? And you couldn't tell. Well, and then I couldn't tell how close it was. And so Liz, our second daughter, had heard me up, and then the combination of noise. She came out in the kitchen. I said, do you mind getting in the car with me? And I want to go see if it truly is a fire, and how close it is to campus, because I can't tell. And so that we got in the car, we drove down to Cold Spring, and I turned left onto Sycamore Canyon, and we got to just the Eucalyptus Hill turnout. Now, I didn't know this, but Ashley Road was going to have damage, which was the next street down.
Oh my gosh.
And so we stopped at Eucalyptus Hill, and I said, Liz, I just don't think we should keep going. And so,
my gosh.
And so I stopped at Eucalyptus Hill, backed up into Eucalyptus Hill, turned back up, and got home. And then, of course, later that morning, found out that one of the creek beds that came apart did a ton of damage on Ashley, and then, of course, a ton of damage on 2 other areas of Montana.
And why did you decide to turn? Was that the Holy Spirit?
I totally believe that. It was like, this is not safe. I was, because you could tell you were going downhill, and just the premonition was, I should be getting higher ground, not lower ground.
Right.
And so that's what caused me to stop and just turn around, go back up.
Goodness. It's, for those of you who don't know, in Santa Barbara, so this was 2018, and 23 people died in this, and there was literally like a river that went to the ocean from the mountains, because the ground was all singed because of the fire that had just happened, so that it wasn't absorbing the water. So this 9-minute downpour that Dr. Beebe is talking about literally created a river with boulders the size of cars, and were carried to the ocean. 23 people passed away, and Westmont, of course, was right in the neighborhood. And so, what a wild day that was.
We're glad to be far removed from it.
Yeah, and the decisions. Real quickly, because a couple minutes on this side of the break, with a college president. And this is, of course, true, the leader, United States president, but things don't get to that level unless nobody else could solve them. I mean, at least the big questions, right? If somebody else could solve them, it would have been solved already.
Right.
So you have to, that's a big part of the job, is actually, and I know you have an executive team and
great
support,
executive team.
But I mean, how is that for you?
Well, I mean, I'm just starting my 25th year as a college president, 18 at Westmont and 7 at Spring Arbor. And so over time you develop a capacity to see what should be coming your way, what isn't. Sometimes, like even today, during kind of my early morning prep time for the day, thinking through what's some information that I need that I haven't gotten yet. And so you begin to develop a sense of what decisions you need to be involved in, where you should be in the decision-making cycle. And you recognize I am very much into pattern recognition. And so what are the patterns, the habitual patterns, and then what are the exceptions to it? And studying with Peter Drucker, I did the dual degree at Claremont, so my PhD's in philosophy, but my MBA is with Drucker. And Drucker, I loved studying with him, had 4 classes with him. He was amazingly available to his students. If you wanted to have lunch with him, he would make time. And it just left a huge mark on me. But he would say all these things like, a CEO doesn't get up in the morning and just say, what do I want to do? A CEO has to get up in the morning and say, what do I need to get done to fundamentally advance the mission of my organization? And so if you wake up with that mindset, you're looking at, okay, what is the next sequence of decisions that need to be made?
What needs to be done?
What needs to be done? And then and I do believe you've got to pattern your day so that when surprises or interruptions come, they don't just throw you. And when school's in session, the day almost never begins and ends the way you think it will. and some of them are big interruptions, some of them are small ones. During the summer, even though we have summer school, there's no other student life, there's no athletics, there's nothing else going on, no choir concerts or anything. And so the day begins and ends exactly the way you think it will on almost every day during the few months you have of summer. Well, that's also part of the rhythm and part of the preparation then, closing out this year, getting ready for the new year, and just really being disciplined about it. And I think effective leadership over time just requires a great deal of discipline.
Yeah. We're going to have more right after the break. We're with Dr. Gayle Beebe. Stay with us.